Welcome to the fourth webinar in our Adolescent Success Series showcasing vocabulary. Best practice in vocabulary instruction begins with the teacher's commitment to teaching words well. Learning words well means giving students multiple opportunities to develop word meanings and learn how words are conceptually related to one another in the text that they are studying. Learning vocabulary should not become an isolated activity, but an integral part of the learning and academic content happening throughout the unit cycle. The vocabulary must be taught well enough to remove potential barriers to students' understanding of text and information in content areas. The critical practice enhances the learner's vocabulary and background knowledge, which is critical to reading comprehension. Natalie Wexler, in the book The Knowledge Gap, explained that comprehension grows alongside knowledge and vocabulary. Wexler observed in her study how the lack of vocabulary understanding and knowledge affects students' performance in all content areas and not solely English language arts. So this work by Wexler brings to mind what type of vocabulary instruction should be happening before instruction, during instruction, and after instruction. This webinar will serve as an overview for a series of before, during, and after vocabulary strategies that are based in research. Let's begin our quick journey through an overview of before, during, and after vocabulary strategies you can use immediately in your instruction. This webinar will help clarify the importance of providing intentional vocabulary instruction during your class, as well as explore several evidence-based vocabulary instructional strategies to utilize with students throughout the lesson. Today's learning has automatic stops built in with the use of the participation guide. When you see a tiny picture of notepaper in the upper right or lower left corner of the slide, which is indicated on the slide at the top, this means that you will need to stop the webinar and use the participation guide to think and reflect. Once you complete your work, you can restart the webinar and continue to learn more about the topic. As mentioned in the previous slide, vocabulary and background knowledge are critical to reading comprehension. Conversely, past studies have cited a lack of vocabulary knowledge as detrimental to comprehension. Researchers have suggested that students struggle with expository texts because of the large numbers of new vocabulary terms they contain and the lack of support for vocabulary learning. All of these factors hinder the student's ability to develop content knowledge and reasoning to apply beyond the text. Research now supports the use of evidence-based strategies for before learning to promote background knowledge development and prior knowledge, as well as set the purpose for learning. During learning strategies are used to monitor learning and deepen understanding, and after learning strategies are used to summarize, reflect, and respond to text and beyond text using critical terminology. Before we begin, ask yourself these three questions to set the purpose for your learning today. Why is vocabulary instruction crucial for your students? What are exemplary strategies for vocabulary instruction? And what strategies do we want students to utilize during their reading instruction? In your participation guide, respond to the questions individually or with your TBT group. Stop the webinar to discuss.
We've been talking about the simple view of reading for adolescent learners, but we want to make the connection with the foundational skills that typically develop in elementary grades. One of the best ways to do this is by looking at the graphic of Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. It represents just how complex and interwoven the foundational skills are for word recognition and language comprehension in order to achieve skilled reading, and how all learners are diverse learners based on their strengths and areas they may be struggling with. The graphic is the simple view of reading formula turned on its side with the skills that make up each of the big buckets. So what do you notice about the rope? One of the major things to notice is how the two areas of the simple view of reading are intertwined. The skills of word recognition are braided and the language comprehension skills are twisted. Imagine braiding hair, and if one of the pieces is smaller or missing, the braid will be loose and messy. The 3 word recognition skills need to be tightly woven and solidly internalized by adolescent students to the point of being automatic. The twisted language comprehension area is made up of discrete skills that are constantly building and adding layers of learning through experiences with language. So when the 2 big strands come together, the complete rope results in solid reading comprehension. The word recognition skills must be solid and automatic, while students become more strategic in their use of the language comprehension skills. So as we go back to our focus on vocabulary instruction today, this rope emphasizes the need for all learners to be a part of our vocabulary instructional strategy lessons happening before, during, and after reading to build their knowledge and support their comprehension. How do you choose those vocabulary words that will have the greatest impact on student comprehension and writing? McCowan and Beck cited 4 critical criteria that's crucial for instructional decision-making with vocabulary. Let's review them. Number 1 is importance. How important is it for students to know or learn particular words in order to understand a selection? Words might already be familiar, or the context may support understanding of them. Such words are good candidates for brief discussion during or after reading if they are interesting or new, but they need not be studied in depth. For example, the word spigot may be unfamiliar to students in the northern United States, but the meaning is clear when used in context. There's a water spigot in the shower. This is an example of a word that might simply be mentioned since it is another label for a concept that students already understand. It is a straightforward synonym for tap or faucet. Other words might not be supported by context, but do not need to be taught in depth. Number 2 refers to transferability. Will the word in question be used in other contexts? Another way to think about this is frequency. Does the word occur across other academic domains? Might it be used in other novels? There is a general consensus that it is not a good use of instructional time to teach rare words. The word predatory, which appears in wholes, is likely to show up in science, social studies, and the evening news. If you are a reasonably well-read classroom teacher with a college degree, you may shake your head and say, no wonder teaching vocabulary can seem overwhelming. There are so many words and so little time. I never heard of that word. Then it is probably not a general academic word and thus not a good candidate for in-depth instruction. It might be a word you define briefly or ask a student to look up out of curiosity, but don't hold students responsible for learning words they may never ever see again in their life. Usefulness is area number 3 for generative studies. Does the word you're thinking about teaching have a root, a base word, or affix that lends itself to the study of related words? For example, the word malevolent has the root mal and is related by meaning and spelling to malignant, malicious, malady, maltreatment, malnutrition, and other words that can appear in a variety of contexts. Knowing that the root mal suggests something bad or evil can help students unlock the meanings of many words. The last area is words that students have not encountered before, but are related to the topic and are key to understanding the new topic within the materials studied. Students' acquisition of words related to the content is generally encouraged by teachers as they know that the student has not likely encountered these terms before. So As the famous Martha Stewart would say, these 4 criteria are a good thing. At this point, stop the webinar to use your participation guide to reflect on how you are selecting your vocabulary words and what are you rethinking about next steps with this process. Before you even start with the explicit vocabulary routine, you will need to identify what your students know and don't know. Here is a simple way to pre-assess students, noted in the slide. Now, go to your participation guide. How do you pre-assess your students? Stop the webinar to reflect individually or with your team. Use your participation guide to respond. Afterward, return to this slide for additional information. One of the most important aspects of vocabulary instruction is pre-assessment of students' vocabulary or word knowledge prior to instruction. Without knowing how many words your students already know and to what extent they understand these words, moving forward in your lessons can be difficult and students will not academically achieve success. The reasons for taking time to assess are: 1, vocabulary and reading comprehension are closely connected. If students after 3rd grade do not know the meaning of 90 to 95% of the words in their text, they will experience great difficulty with comprehending and reading fluently. 2, vocabulary is highly correlated with content area success. Poor vocabulary knowledge negatively impacts a student's ability to participate in class routines and conversations. Students with limited vocabularies have difficulty understanding the oral and written language around them. 3, vocabulary impacts knowledge acquisition and thought development. Students who know more words have more abstract language to categorize new concepts. Without labels provided by words, students often lose ideas and concepts. So, it is important to pre-assess students' word knowledge so you can differentiate the curriculum and condense the learning to the most essential critical components required to increase student vocabulary knowledge that is critical for their school success.
Now you have your vocabulary words identified and students pre-assessed to determine their level of understanding with the words. The importance of direct, explicit instruction is the next step in strategy use. The understanding of any complex idea is dependent on knowing the words as well as having the background knowledge used to describe that information. It is important to explicitly teach all students to learn the meaning of unfamiliar words. Anita Archer's explicit vocabulary routine is an excellent place to start. The steps for explicit instruction in the routine are as follows. Step 1, introduce the word's pronunciation. Step 2, introduce the word's meaning. Step 3, illustrate the word with examples and non-examples. Step 4, check students' understanding. As you are viewing the videos, there are live links as well in your participation guide. Use the look for questions posted in your participation guide. Can you identify the 4 core practices? What does the teacher do to model? What does she say when she verbalizes her thinking? How does she provide practice opportunities? And how does she give feedback? When you are finished with the videos, start the webinar back for the next slide. Setting the stage for effective vocabulary instruction starts with a well-planned routine. There are several instructional routines for explicitly teaching vocabulary. Explicit Instruction by Anita Archer, which you just viewed, Marzano's Building Academic Vocabulary, and Beck's Questioning Strategies from Bringing Words to Life. We will specifically focus on Anita Archer today. For before strategies, they activate students' prior knowledge to set the purpose for reading. There are countless strategies that you can use to teach vocabulary. Some of the most effective strategies for students learning are the Freyer model, semantic maps, word concepts and word sorts, list, group, and label, and lastly, mnemonics. We will break these down further in the following slides. The Freyer model is a graphic organizer for building student vocabulary. You may be familiar with this. This technique requires students to define target vocabulary and apply their knowledge by generating examples and non-examples, giving characteristics, and or drawing a picture to illustrate the meaning of a word. A virtual option is linked in this slide from Ideas Board. If you like this version, it's very easy to use. It's an interactive virtual tool that you can use for more than just the Freyer model. The purpose of creating a semantic map is to visually display the meaning-based connections between a word or phrase in a set of related words or concepts. Semantic maps help students to identify, understand, and recall the meaning of words they read in the text. This is not a pre-made graphic organizer created by the teacher. Instead, the student should create the map to work for them. This is a strategy that should be modeled by the teacher first, so the students understand the process and purpose. There is a link in the article to discuss further development of semantic mapping. Word concept and sort is a simple small group activity. Students list keywords from a reading selection. Alternately, the teacher may provide a list of terms prior to the reading activity. Students identify the meaning and properties of each word and then sort the list into collections of words with similar features. This would also be a great pre-assessment. List group label makes words come alive for students through their conversations and reflections on the meaning connections between words. It actively engages students in learning new vocabulary and content by activating their critical thinking skills. Mnemonics are strategies that can be modified to fit a variety of learning content. This method enhances memory of complex words or ideas and promotes better retention of material to be learned. It is especially beneficial for students who may have difficulty with information recall. Now look to your participation guide. Pick one strategy from the before segment to implement with your class in the next week. Use the participation guide to help guide and organize your plan. It is important that you are intentional with your instruction and pre-plan before the lesson. This pre-planning will support successful instruction and maximize student clarity, which is essential to digging into familiar content. Return to the webinar in the next slide once you've finished.
During strategies help students make connections, monitor their understanding, generate questions, and stay focused. The following strategies will provide student engagement during your vocabulary instruction: double entry journals, inquiry charts, word hunts, story mapping, and selective highlighting. The following slides will provide further information as to what these strategies are. The double entry journal strategy enables students to record their responses to text as they read. Students write down phrases or sentences from their assigned reading and then write their own reaction to that passage. The purpose of this strategy is to give students the opportunity to express their thoughts and become actively involved with the material they read. The inquiry chart, referred to as the eye chart, is a strategy that enables students to generate meaningful questions about the topic and organize their writing. Students integrate prior knowledge or thoughts about the topic with additional information found in several sources. The eye chart procedure is organized into 3 phases: 1, planning; 2, interacting; and 3, integrating, evaluating. Each phase consists of activities designed to engage students in evaluating a topic. Word hunts are used to enhance students' vocabulary growth. Teachers ask students to look for words and patterns in reading materials based upon selected features. Word hunts focus on the structure and meaning of words by turning students' attention to spelling patterns and root words. Story maps are used for teaching students to work with story structure for better comprehension. This technique uses visual representations to help students organize important elements of a story. Students learn to summarize the main ideas, characters, setting, and plot of the assigned reading. Selective highlighting or underlining is used to help students organize what they have read by selecting what is important. This strategy teaches students to highlight, underline only the key words, phrases, vocabulary, and ideas that are central to understanding the reading. Using your participation guide, pick one strategy from the during segment to implement with your class in the next week. Use the participation guide to help organize your plan. It is important that you are intentional with your instruction and pre-plan before you instruct. This pre-planning will support successful instruction and maximize student clarity, which is essential to digging into unfamiliar content. Return to the webinar and the next slide once you finish.
After strategies provide students an opportunity to summarize, question, reflect, discuss, and respond to text by think, pair, share their ideas by comparing explanations, describing and explaining drawings, and discussing any new information they have learned. Students can make revisions to their own work and to add to their vocabulary explanation and visuals if necessary. This is an optimal time to continue to identify and clear up any misunderstandings about new terms if necessary. Activities are listed on the right in support of after instruction strategies and vocabulary. Review on your own or with your team. Which have you used? Which activities are new and ones not explored yet? Proceed to the next slide when you finish your discussion for more on the activities listed above. Using vocabulary journals can increase the engagement and motivation that students have in mastering vocabulary, since the information is personally entered by the students and can be used as their own personal reference, both inside and outside of the classroom. Interactive word walls focus on academic vocabulary that is unfamiliar and related to the content. It would contain multiple meaning words, affixes, and root words related to the core content topic. The purpose is for words to be generated by students related to what is being studied. Students manipulate the words and discuss the relationships among the words to build their understanding of the content. It can also be used as a reference during reading and writing, making students more independent while teaching them how to use a reference tool. Providing a color-coded visual for words makes it extremely easy for teachers and students to constantly review new words. Interactive word walls set the stage for easy, no-prep games to add fun to your classroom. Students love being able to look at the word wall to add words to their writing, taking ownership of their vocabulary instruction while promoting strong reading skills. Graphic organizers are helpful learning tools for students of all ages to organize, clarify, or simplify complex information. They help students construct understanding through an exploration of the relationships between concepts. Teacher-generated organizers are a useful scaffold to support students' learning. However, students should eventually begin to create their own graphic organizers. Students will achieve deeper learning and understanding of vocabulary by practicing with wordplay. What is wordplay, you might want to know? Games, riddles, jokes, and puzzles all motivate students. These activities have a strong research base. They require students to reflect on words, word parts, and how to use the word in context. Wordplay also requires that students be active learners while engaging in practice and rehearsal of the words. Using your participation guide, pick one strategy from the after segment to implement within your class in the next week or so. Use the participation guide to help organize your plan. It is important that you are intentional with your instruction and pre-plan before any lesson. This pre-planning will support successful instruction and maximize student clarity, which is essential to digging into unfamiliar content. Return to the webinar once you are finished.
Research has shown that there are ineffective ways to teach vocabulary. We have all taught at least one of these in our lifetime. Take a moment to read the list on the left. Reflect on what your current practice is and how you can change the ineffective ways to teach vocabulary. Stop the webinar while you reflect on this individually or with your team. When we know better, we do better. Using your participation guide, reflect on what ineffective strategies have you used in the past? Why is it ineffective? What and how will you change in your vocabulary instruction in the future? What are some of the next steps you can take? There is ample evidence that when meaningful instruction designed by a teacher is combined with motivational tool technologies, students' cognitive, emotional, and behavioral engagement can be significantly increased. More than technology could ever achieve alone. During this time, online learning is used more than any other time in our history. We constantly need to add tools to our toolbox to provide engaging, interactive ways for students to learn. The following ideas are shared as options for online vocabulary engagement. What other ideas do you find worthy of noting and sharing with others?
We have added some additional website and video resources for you to review if you are interested. The left side of the slide contains the website articles. The right side contains videos showcasing some of the strategies we discussed today. The resources listed on the Frayer model can be adapted for struggling students, which usually requires text to complete the graphic organizer directly teaching vocabulary. You could use icons or graphics or even objects to represent the words, or the examples and non-examples. Since the goal is to internalize the meaning of vocabulary words and does not require the spelling for struggling diverse students, it is access to the curriculum at this point rather than reading instruction, which is ideal for a diverse learner working on vocabulary knowledge. That doesn't mean not to teach or expose students to words that they have yet to know for grade level reading, for their skills for spelling, morphology, and etymology, which is the study of the word origins. You are simply adapting writing words in the boxes with icons and graphics so they can learn from the words and have access to the lesson. We use the following resources to develop this webinar and highly recommend the above resources for digging deeper for your own learning.
Today's webinar focused on before, during, and after vocabulary strategies you can use to meet the needs of your students through explicit vocabulary instruction. We reviewed components recommended by research and reflected on our classroom practice or program used with students. You will want to hold onto your worksheet as we will be building on our knowledge and skill with explicit vocabulary instruction through our webinar series. If you enjoyed this webinar, please give us a shout out on Twitter and include @OhioSST8.
We know you have many choices for professional development and you can join our webinars whenever you choose. Please contact us if you have questions about any of the content. For educators looking for vocabulary instruction strategy support for adolescent diverse learners, struggling with acquisition and use, we are in the process of developing a set of webinars on that. Look for those webinars to appear sometime in January of 2021. We look forward to continuing our dive into adolescent literacy with the upcoming Strategy Snippets in Action mini webinars in our series, showcasing 2 in-depth before, 2 during, and 2 after strategies as part of our focus to bring vocabulary instruction strategies in action to you. We hope you will join us for the 6 strategy snippets in our next sessions. See you then.